Win this game, and I'll wire you $100 million. That's what he said, with the city glittering behind him like a promise he didn't plan to keep. And in the next breath he added, "And your mother is gone by sunrise." He laughed like he'd bought the oxygen in that glass library, and we were stealing it. He tapped the onyx king with one finger, amused, certain dangerous. I was 10 small for my age, hair yanked back with a chipped barrette, and my mom, Ms. Reyes, was on a step stool, dusting his first editions, trying to be invisible, while Victor Langford, hedge fund royalty, decided what kind of story our lives were going to be. He asked her if she played chess. She said, "No, sir," and he said it wasn't for simple people. Then he looked at me just long enough for the heat to rise in my face, and before my brain could catch my mouth, I said, "My mother may not play, sir, but I do." You ever feel a room tilt, like there's a door opening that only stays open for 3 seconds, and if you don't move now, you'll wake up in the same life forever? You know what I mean? That was the scrape of my chair across the marble when I sat down at his walnut and onyx board. I touched a white pawn, felt the cool weight, and nudged it forward. Nothing fancy, just a heartbeat, and he smiled the way a cat smiles at a red dot, and brought his pieces out like knives. Bishops cutting diagonals, knights leaping fences, a storm rolling in off the bay. He talked because men like him talk when they want you rattled. He said, "Bravery and wisdom aren't twins. Think about your rent, your mother resigned now, and I'll pretend this never happened." And I set my bishop and told him, "It is your move, Mr. Langford," and he didn't like that. I played the way my abuelo taught me at the community center off Mission No opening names. Just stories, pawns are neighbors with ladders when the roof leaks. Knights are the kids who hop fences when the parade stalls, rooks are trucks on long straight roads, and the real game is listening to the board breathe. So I listened while I built a fence around my king, not pretty, just strong, and Mom tucked the feather duster under her arm like a shield, and stood very still, and I could feel her prayers like a hand on my back. Midway through, he changed the temperature. The playful cruelty went quiet, and something colder slid in. He stared at the board, then at my mother, then back at me, and he moved his queen into a place that didn't make sense until it did. A sacrifice, bright and reckless, the kind of bait you take and then spend 10 moves dying from. And I took it because that was the only honest move on the table. Checks started ringing like weather alerts. Rook check, knight check, rook check. My king, running with its pockets turned out, while he leaned back and steepled his fingers, and said, "One move and it all ends the way it always ends." And if this were a movie, I'd have delivered a speech, but this was my life, so I just glanced at Mom, and she did this tiny thing. She nodded, not a promise, a permission. 3 moves earlier, while he hunted trophies, I'd nudged a pawn nobody cared about on the left edge of the board. Nothing dramatic, one square, then another. No spotlight, no bragging rights, just stubborn motion, the way small lives advance when big lives aren't looking. Now it stood one step from the end of the world, and while Victor chased my king into a corner that smelled like loss, I pushed that pawn and watched his face go. Still watched him replay 10 minutes, then 20. Then the beginning, looking for the fork, where his story broke, and he found it the moment he decided the smallest piece didn't matter. "Promote to a queen," I said, as soft as the lamplight. I set the new piece like a blade, and with 2 moves I drew a net. He couldn't cut, checkmate. No victory dance, no gloating, just breath in a room that finally remembered how to be a room. And he stood, handshaking, called someone named Paige, said, "Transfer 100 million to whatever account this family designates now." Then stared at the pawn that had become a queen like it had told him a secret about himself he'd been avoiding for years. We walked home through Mission Street noise without saying a word, sat on our couch, with the mean spring that bites your thigh. If you forget where it hides, stared at my mom's phone, when the bank app blinked numbers that could build a bridge or start a war. And the first thing we did was call the spearmint breath lawyer from church, who says scary things calmly, and told her, "Please wrap this in armor before anyone touches a dime." Yeah, that happened. 3 nights later, there was a knock at 9:40. Nobody knocks at 9:40 unless it's a problem or a neighbor's cat. Mom checked the peephole and gasped. It's him, and there stood Victor in gray slacks and a polo that made him look unarmed. No driver, no entourage, just a leather folder clutched like a lifeboat. "May I come in, Ms. Reyes?" He didn't do the rich man scan that inventory look, where your sofa becomes a number. He just took in the photos on the wall, the chip in the coffee table, the TV remote held together with tape, and he set a grainy photo on the table, 2 men in front of a modest brick factory with a hand-painted sign. Reyes Fabrication, my grandfather's jawline on the younger one, stubborn and kind. My fund took this place apart in 2002. He said they called it efficient. They were wrong, and I swear the room changed air. He said he didn't know until the night after the game, when the scratch of our last name wouldn't leave his head, and that he couldn't put back what was taken, only choose what he did next. Then he slid papers across to Mom, not a press release, not a Band-Aid, a separate trust in our family name and bylaws for a fund that would protect small shops, the way no one protected ours: Bakersfield welders, Yuma machinists, Fresno seamstresses, the people who keep towns breathing when headlines look away. We moved 2 blocks, not a mansion, just a place where the hallway lights don't flicker and the faucet doesn't hiss at 2 a.m. Mom left house cleaning gently. Like taking off a heavy coat, we hired 3 people whose job was saying no when cousins you haven't seen since kindergarten remembered your number. And I kept going to school because richness doesn't change how algebra smells. On Sundays, something new started. He'd text a park or a pier or the Embarcadero food court when it rained, and we'd play on a $30 thrift store set. He never beat me, but he learned to lose without trying to buy the feeling off. And a few months later, he asked me to sit in the corner during a meeting. Not a board seat, I was still using a step stool to reach our top cabinets, just a chair, while men with crisp haircuts presented a plan to buy a plant in Stockton and call the layoffs synergies. I didn't say a word for an hour because listening is a move too. Then I asked what synergies meant on slide 7. And the CFO smiled like he was about to be kind and said cost savings. And I asked if he meant firing people who'd just paid off minivans. The room went quiet. Victor didn't rescue anyone, and I slid a pencil sketch of a chessboard across the table. What if you partner instead and help them upgrade their machines? What if you don't take their pawn off the board but help it cross? The CFO coughed something about markets. Victor said, "Try it. We're not taking their roof, we're bringing a ladder." That choice made him enemies. Old friends stopped calling a trade. Magazine wrote a sneer that went viral for a day, then drowned under the next outrage. But that Stockton plant is still open, and last Christmas, a card showed up with a photo of a breakroom tree stacked with wrapped gifts and a caption that said, "My daughter got a bike." Small things I know, but small things add up when you stop pretending they don't. The trust in my grandfather's name stayed stubborn, a bakery in Tulsa that makes bolillos you dream about at 2 a.m. A machinist in Yuma who refused to move because his mother's headstone is there. A seamstress collective whose waiting list wraps around the block. Our rules are simple. We do paperwork, but we back people. Years slid by like a good song on repeat. I grew into my face. People stopped saying kid and started saying young lady in that way that makes you roll your eyes. Victor's hair went from expensive silver to honest white. On Sundays, we still set up the board and talked gambits and AP exams. And the time he almost lost the company because he trusted the wrong whisper, and he said, Redemption is boring work, dressed like spreadsheets, go figure. One night on a community center roof in Dogpatch, the bay hammered flat by wind, he handed me a letter naming me a non-voting advisor to his company's Human Impact Committee, now with a clause that flips to a voting seat when I turn 18, if I accept. And I could hear the internet lighting its torches, mascot, prop conscience, that word. They paste on girls who haven't finished being girls. So I told him I needed to think, and he nodded, said some debts. Never clear. You pay them by how you show up tomorrow. The last time we played, he looked at the board and laughed softly. Said you laid a net 10 moves ago, and I still walked into it. And for the first time he resigned before checkmate set the king on its side and said, "Teach me the end game again." So here's your ending. That's not really an ending, because life doesn't do tidy bows. The foundation is humming the plant in Stockton, is hiring my mom, grows tomatoes in a small backyard, and says order is a love language. And there is still a man out there who once laughed at us in a glass library and now spends his Sundays learning how to lose better so he can do something useful with his wins. The open question, the part you'll argue about in the comments, is whether I should take that seat when I turn 18, whether letting the girl who once promoted a pawn to a queen help steer a giant company is redemption or theater, whether a man like Victor can ever be forgiven, or if restitution without consequences just trains more victors, whether refusing the seat keeps me clean but outside while colder hands make the moves. Tell me what you think. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've ever felt like a pawn in somebody else's game and how you crossed the board. Drop your take, hit like and subscribe if you want more messy stories that try to get it right. And yeah, I read everything.